Ladies and gentlesaurs, welcome to Assessing Survival, the series where we take creatures from both our world and fiction, placing them in different periods throughout history, as well as fantastical settings from outside of reality. In today's episode, we will be taking the common vampire bat, Desmodus rotundus, sending them back in time to the Mesozoic era, specifically what is now Liaoning province in China in the Lower Cretaceous period, using species found in the Johol biota as a reference for their interactions. I will be using 4 different categories to assess the vampire bat's ability to survive. Those categories are environment suitability, strengths and weaknesses, prey items, and threats and competition. The scores for these categories will then be added up for a survival assessment score. 1 to 3 being they are unlikely to survive and may go extinct, 4 to 6 being they are likely to survive but with great or moderate difficulty, and more than 7 being they certainly will survive with little or no difficulty. And towards the end of the video, we'll speculate on how bats may change or adapt to better fit their environment, regardless of their score. But just before we hop in, do me a quick favor and leave a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Today, vampire bats live in Latin America, stretching from Mexico all the way down to Uruguay and northern Argentina. They inhabit warm tropical forests, preferring areas with dense vegetation and dark roosting spots like caves and hollow trees. The Johol biota in early Cretaceous China was much like Liaoning provinces today, temperate with seasonal variations. However, being the Cretaceous, it was probably warmer on average than it is today. Evidence suggests that it was a wet and humid environment with lakes, rivers, and volcanic activity. Winters in Liaoning province today have an average temperature of -30 degrees Celsius or -22 degrees Fahrenheit in January, but in the Cretaceous, the area was further south, making it somewhere between temperate and subtropical. It may have rarely dipped below 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Vampire bats prefer the tropical weather of South America, but live as far north as Sonora, Mexico, where winters can drop as low as 17 degrees Fahrenheit or -8 degrees Celsius. They might be less active during these times, but populations are usually not largely affected. While vampire bats are more successful in and prefer a more tropical environment, the temperate/subtropical environment of the Johol biota shouldn't be too hard of an adjustment considering the Earth was generally warmer in the Cretaceous. For those reasons, I'm giving them an 8 out of 10 for environment suitability. Vampire bats are definitely the most specialized animal that I've covered in the series. Such intense specialization would be a huge handicap for most animals, but not in the case of the vampire bat. These guys are, as far as we know, the only vertebrates in history that feed entirely on blood. Their teeth have no enamel, which allows them to remain almost permanently razor sharp and effectively slice through flesh. After creating a small incision in their prey's skin, they lap up the blood with their tongues. These tongues have groove structures that draw the blood into their mouth by capillary action. Their saliva contains an anticoagulant to keep the blood flowing, as well as a mild anesthetic to reduce pain at the site of feeding so that they don't wake their host. They drink about half their weight in blood every day to sustain themselves on this odd choice of sustenance. The common vampire bat's choices for hosts were mostly small rainforest animals like tapirs, capybaras, and peccaries. However, once colonists brought farm animals like cattle, pigs, and horses, vampire bats exploded far beyond their natural numbers. If the introduction of cattle has this effect on vampire bat populations, what kind of effect would massive animals like hadrosaurs or sauropods have? Vampire bats and their relatives, of course, live a nocturnal lifestyle, which circumvents much of the predation from animals like hawks and eagles. Contrary to popular belief, bats do not have bad eyesight. They have pretty decent eyesight. However, they are most well known for using echolocation. Vampire bats make use of echolocation, but mostly to navigate obstacles in their environment at speed, rather than find insects like other bats. Even more important than echolocation, vampire bats have noses that are lined with specialized nerve fibers that allow them to sense the infrared radiation coming off of warm-blooded animals. All bats are thought to be far more intelligent than previously given credit for, and the smartest of species are thought by some to even be on par with chimps or dolphins. Vampire bats themselves are often regarded as the most intelligent of the bats, although this spot is contested with the flying fox. Each individual vampire bat will create and remember their own detailed mental map of their flight routes and where they've found food in the past. They can also communicate, learn from, and bond with one another, something we see come into play in their colonies. They live and hang out in large colonies making up hundreds or even thousands of bats suspended from the ceilings of caves. They cultivate the success and survival of the colony through reciprocal altruism, meaning they will sacrifice their own needs for another member of the colony. sharing blood with unsuccessful individuals with the expectation that the favor will be returned in the future. It's observed that bats that have shared blood in the past will get larger blood donations in the future, compared to selfish bats who don't. Like, if my brother let me be player 1 in LEGO Star Wars more often growing up, maybe I would have gone to his wedding. Their tight living conditions make bats highly resistant to, but also carriers of, many diseases. This could help them deal with any unfamiliar pathogens that may come their way in the Cretaceous. One obvious weakness that vampire bats suffer from is their size. From head to toe, they are only 1 to 2 inches or 6.5 to 9 centimeters in length, with an average wingspan of 14 inches or 35 centimeters, and an average weight of 35 grams. This is not a large animal. They are also not that fast, with average recorded flight speeds being just shy of 14 kilometers per hour or 8 miles per hour, which is leagues slower than many of the predators that hunt them. But for what the bats lack in speed, they make up for in their maneuverability. When we compare the wings of bats to those of birds and pterosaurs, we see that the bat's wing is stretched across each of its fingers, rather than to the rear finger or to the wrist like with the others. This gives them unmatched flexibility and control over their maneuvers in the air, being able to make sharp turns on a dime, something that can make their pursuer lose track of them pretty quickly. And one last thing that won't dramatically help or hurt them, but I think is a neat fact: bats on average live much longer than other mammals their size. Rodents of an equivalent size may live to be 3 years old, while most bats, including vampire bats themselves, can live to be over 20 years old, with the highest recorded age from another species being 41 years old. So, to conclude this category, their slower speed and very small size puts them pretty low in the food chain right off the bat. But vampire bats have a surprising amount of adaptations that will really help them establish themselves in this new environment despite their strangely specific choice of diet. So for those reasons, I'm giving them a 7 out of 10 in the strengths and weaknesses category. The unique nature of the vampire bat is going to cause a deviation in our usual train of thought for this category. This is an animal that feeds primarily upon sleeping warm-blooded animals several times their size, only drinking their blood instead of consuming their flesh. Their bodies are in fact so specialized for this diet that if they attempted to start eating anything else, it would probably cause immediate impaction and kill them very quickly. So we know that they prefer large mammals back in the modern day, but there are no large mammals in the early Cretaceous. There are, however, plenty of massive dinosaurs that were at least mesothermic, namely Saurischian dinosaurs like sauropods and theropods. Mesothermic is an intermediate metabolic state between cold and warm-blooded organisms. Mesotherms generate some internal heat like warm-blooded animals, but are also influenced by environmental temperatures. Presumably, vampire bats would still be able to detect Saurischian dinosaurs with their specialized nerve fibers. But this doesn't rule out our Ornithischian dinosaurs, who were either cold-blooded or closer to ectothermy than their Saurischian cousins. Vampire bats can use their powerful echolocation to pick up on the breathing of sleeping animals, and we can safely assume that they can do the same for these dinosaurs as well. Their preference for warm-blooded animals doesn't necessarily mean that they just can't see cold-blooded animals. Their specialized noses are detecting heat, meaning if an ectothermic dinosaur spent its afternoon sunbathing, it would still be radiating some of that heat at night. So it's more likely that vampire bats will be drawn to theropods and sauropods, while occasionally feeding on ornithischians. In my opinion, they would most certainly prefer sauropods to any other prey item. In fact, I don't think they would waste their time with anything else if they've got the choice. One Liaoning titan or other titanosaur in the region is enough to feed 100 vampire bats, probably more. And we know that these dinosaurs likely lived and moved in herds. There's also the probability that, given how large they are and how much they have to eat to sustain themselves, sauropod blood would have been absolutely stuffed with nutrients. The scale at which sauropods consumed plant matter would result in their blood being richer in plant-derived nutrients that would give the bats a really calorically dense and nutritious meal, meaning we might end up seeing some pretty fat bats. So, despite the fact that their preferred prey item is not available to them in the Cretaceous, just like when Europeans brought cattle to the New World, vampire bats will make good use of sauropods as a new food source, and probably just absolutely explode in population, which is why I'm giving them a 10 out of 10 for the prey items category. In terms of competition, they don't really have any. As far as we know, they're the only vertebrate in history that feeds exclusively on blood. There are invertebrates like ticks, leeches, and mosquitoes, but it's not like these animals will be fighting for feeding space on a dinosaur. So we can pretty safely say that the bats will have zero competition. But they will definitely have threats. In early Cretaceous China, their main threat is going to come from flying or arboreal animals, and there are a lot of them. However, only a handful were believed to be, or can reasonably be assumed to have been active at night without too much speculation. The majority of mammals in the Mesozoic were believed to have been nocturnal, but even arboreal species would pose little threat to vampire bats. The only mammal that I believe was large enough to eat a vampire bat would be Gobiconodon, but this animal would probably not be a regular enough problem to affect the vampire bat score. There are a lot of pterosaurs in the region, a good number of them being just the right size to prey on vampire bats, which I have listed for you here. Most of these guys are believed to have eaten fish, but could probably make use of vampire bats as a new food source. However, we run into our problem again. There's no evidence that I could find that any of these pterosaurs were nocturnal, except for one. Vesperopterylus. This was a neurognathid pterosaur that primarily fed on insects, pretty much filling the same niche that other bats do in the modern world, with a wingspan of 99 centimeters or 39 inches. It was remarkably similar to bats in terms of its body plan, likely also being able to make quick, sharp turns just as they do. But rather than using echolocation to hone in on prey, they had large eyes that allowed them to hunt at dusk or low light conditions like owls. These guys could, I think, pretty easily apply their skills in hunting insects to hunting the vampire bats. They might even grow accustomed to catching vampire bats, leaving and returning to their roosts at dawn and dusk to feed on sauropods at night, sort of like crocodiles picking off wildebeests as they cross the river. Though this is pure speculation on my part because, as far as I found, there's no evidence that this species preys upon anything other than insects. There isn't much evidence for true nocturnal birds in the Johor biota, meaning they probably won't be too much of a threat. Confucius ornis, one of the first birds to evolve a toothless beak, was about the same size as a crow and could probably snatch up a bat, though again, they were not nocturnal, leaving aves or true birds out of the equation. There are other airborne dinosaurs, however, that have evidence for a nocturnal lifestyle, or were at least partially active at night, one of them being Sinornithosaurus. Comparisons between the scleral rings of Sinornithosaurus and modern relatives indicate that it may have been calf marrow, which means that they could have been active during both the day and the night in irregular intervals. As far as we know, they were not capable of powered flight, but were definitely semi-arboreal with the ability to glide a great distance. I doubt they would be able to actively chase vampire bats down, but rather ambush them as they fly by or stop to rest. There's no data or estimates on how fast they might have been, but given the speed estimates for the closely related Microraptor, they were at least faster than the vampire bat. Speaking of Microraptor, these guys would pose a much larger threat than Sinornithosaurus, because it was fully arboreal and adapted to leap from tree to tree, likely catching small prey items just like vampire bats. They probably even preyed upon the very similar Vesperopterylus. There's also evidence that they may have been nocturnal or calf marrow like Sinornithosaurus, with similar evidence found in their skeletal structure. Assuming they are active at night, or at least crepuscular, Microraptor could certainly be a big problem as vampire bats fly through the forests. Their speed estimates range anywhere between 36 to 54 kilometers per hour or 22 to 33 miles per hour. Microraptor could certainly outpace and ambush unsuspecting vampire bats, but would probably struggle to deal with their maneuverability if detected. Their heavier build would make attempting moves like that in the air a fast track to hitting the forest floor. Microraptor also has a similar but larger relative, Changyu raptor, who was nearly turkey-sized but had the same body plan and lifestyle as Microraptor. So, while they don't have any competition in their very specific niche, the vampire bats are definitely going to be on the menu for any flying or arboreal animals around them at night. Truth be told, they really aren't much worse off with the Cretaceous predators than they are with the predators in the Holocene. In fact, I think they're better off than they are today. Today, we see with the abundance of vampire bats, the owls and other predators of South America are really not enough to keep them in check. Not only do they have access to an even greater food source, but nocturnal predators in the region are just not going to be nearly as well adapted to hunting them as owls are. So for those reasons, I'm going to give them a 7.5 out of 10 in the threats and competition category. Which brings us to our survival assessment score. When adding up the scores all together, Desmodus rotundus gets a survival assessment score of 8 out of 10. Vampire bats did surprisingly well. Though their size and slow speed puts them on a pretty low rung in the trophic ladder, the presence of large mesothermic dinosaurs gives them access to more nutrients that they could ever hope for to reproduce and spread across the continent. Such a specific choice of sustenance would usually be a death sentence for any animal I place in a different time period. But funny enough, it works to their benefit here. I don't think they need to adapt at all. I chose the Johor biota because of its diverse record of flying animals that might give them a challenge, but I don't think it really would have mattered when and where I put them in the Mesozoic. But just like with every episode, regardless of how well or poorly the animal does, we'll speculate on how these animals may change in this new world they find themselves in. Penhames yin and Heo Titan Yang, the hanging blood rat of yin and the blood rat's titan of yang. Vampire bats quickly took to sauropods as their preferred food source, and they began to search for roosts that were closest to where sauropods commonly rest. Over generations, some bats just stopped bothering to leave the sauropod in the morning at all, clutching to their undersides and covering their eyes to sleep in the shade of the massive dinosaur. Some even began to cover themselves with cycad and ginkgo leaves to avoid being seen by predators that might snatch them off while they sleep during the day. Penhames yin are descendants of these vampire bats that evolved around sauropods as their sole source of food, going on to develop a symbiotic relationship, leading to the coevolution of Heo Titan Yang, a massive species of sauropod whose lifestyle has become dependent on them. Penhames yin are slightly larger than their ancestors, with a wingspan of 20 centimeters or 8 inches, weighing around 70 grams, getting larger only as a result of feeding on such nutrient-dense blood. They live in roosts in colonies of anywhere between 50 to 100 individuals, residing in tents made of leaves and sticks hanging off of various parts of their host, typically on their sides and backs so they don't get crushed when the animal lies down. They build these tents by applying resin from chirolepid trees to the skin of their sauropod host, binding their materials to it like glue. The Penhames will sleep in these tents during the day, and then come out to feed on the sauropod at night. The Heo Titan Yang is the host of this symbiotic relationship. They reach lengths of up to 78 feet or 23 meters, and a height of 48 feet or 15 meters. They allow the Penhames to roost and feed on them because their urine of all things has become vital to the sauropod's lifestyle. After feeding on them, the Penhames will urinate over the incision made in their skin. The bat's livers produce large amounts of vitamin K, which acts as a counter to the anticoagulant in their saliva, healing their wounds so they don't lose too much blood. The sauropod cannot smell the intense ammonia in the bat's urine, but is extra sensitive to the citrusy aroma of the vitamin K, the former deterring predators from attacking both animals, and the latter acting as a cologne for sauropods during the mating season. Female Heo Titan will choose a mate based on how pleasant their pee cologne smells, because a pleasant smell is an indicator that the male is eating well, which makes the urine of the bats smell better. Other than pissing all over the dinosaur, the bats will search for and kill any parasites it might have, though their digestive system doesn't allow them to eat these parasites. When a Heo Titan reaches a large enough size, which is typically either upon reaching sexual maturity or when they join a larger herd, younger Penhames will leave their colonies to form new ones on the backs of these younger sauropods. If you couldn't tell, I based this symbiotic duo off the concept and connotations of yin and yang. Wofu Bat, which roughly translates to the quick bat of 5 blessings, or the Wofu Bat for short. Some bats did not want to make the dangerous flight to the open environments where larger dinosaurs were, instead choosing to stick close by to their caves, feeding on smaller animals that roamed the forests like early mammals and birds, and often got into trouble as these animals fought to get them off. They were also more likely to get targeted by Microraptor, and had to get used to being wary of or chased by these predators. The Wofu Bats are descendants of those more careful and battle-tested bats that remained in the forest. They are much larger than their ancestors, with a wingspan of roughly 38 inches or 97 centimeters, weighing about half a pound or 227 grams. Instead of silently drinking the blood of a host in their sleep, they will fly in, grabbing their prey with their claws and ensnare them in their wings, using their long fangs to pierce their windpipe much like a saber-toothed cat. However, this bat will not eat the flesh like other predators. They will hang upside down and hold the prey item up vertically from the open wound to allow the blood to drain quickly into their mouth. Despite their larger size, predators like Microraptor and Sinornithosaurus, as well as the odd pterosaur, remain a danger to them. Their body mass is still only a fraction of theirs. They can easily get away from these predators with their superior maneuverability, so long as they aren't caught off guard. The Wofu Bat has a much longer lifespan than other bats, living up to 83 years, something that may be attributed to the large amounts of blood they drink in comparison to vampire bats. The Wofu Bat will catch as much as 12 prey items a day, though they can survive off of as little as 1 or 2. They hunt so many prey items because they will bring several of them back to their roost, where they live in groups of often no more than 5 individuals, consisting of only close family members. And each member has their own role. Usually only one of these bats do the hunting on a given day. There is one that protects and watches over the roost, one that is typically very old and can no longer hunt, one that heals the wounds of the rest with their antiseptic saliva, and one that is raising the group's young and tending to the elder bat. I based this species' biology and behavior off the Chinese cultural concept of the 5 blessings or the 5 good fortunes, which, funny enough, is depicted as 5 bats. longevity, wealth, health and composure, love of virtue, and peaceful death. The Yamonstrogoi Jeholi, whose name means the brutal ghost of the Jehol. Some Wofu Bats, especially those that were most often the hunters of their group, did not return to their families with food. Instead, they continued to hunt on their own. They ate all the prey they caught for themselves, becoming greedy, growing larger with each generation. Eventually, they grew so large that they would hunt other Wofu Bats. Then they moved to small dinosaurs like Psittacosaurus, to even theropods like Bipaosaurus and Dilong. The Yamonstrogoi are large, mostly terrestrial descendants of those greedy Wofu Bats. They are facultative bipeds with a very hunched-over posture, walking mostly on all fours but capable of walking on their hind legs. While on all fours, they are about 3.5 feet or just over a meter tall at the shoulder, but when on their hind legs, they are about 5.5 feet or 1.6 meters tall, with a wingspan of roughly 11 feet or 3.3 meters. They are very lightly built for their size, only weighing 180 pounds or 82 kilograms. With relatively thin bones wrapped in skeletal muscle, which is packed with fast-twitch muscle fibers, granting them incredible strength, speed, and agility. They maintain a set of wings, though due to their weight, size, and lack of hollow bones, they can no longer take flight. They can, however, maintain a glide for up to 100 meters. For an animal burdened with a set of wings, they are quite fast on the ground, with sustained speeds reaching 40 kilometers per hour or 25 miles per hour, and powerful bursts topping out at 64 kilometers per hour or 40 miles per hour. They have very large ears and highly sensitive thermal detection fibers in their face that, much like vampire bats, they can use to locate prey items from a distance. By far, their primary form of sense to detect prey items are their eyes. These large eyes have twice the amount of rod cells than those of barn owls, allowing them to see in the dark just as well as you or I would during the day. Yamonstrogoi, like their relatives, would prefer their prey items to be sleeping. Upon finding a sleeping prey item, they will use their long fangs to deliver a killing blow to their windpipe, pinning them to the ground with their powerful limbs. In the event that they need to chase down a fleeing prey item, they can easily close the distance by either running or leaping off of a tree and gliding towards them, slashing with their claws and striking with closed fists to subdue them. The Yamonstragoi's musculature is almost 90% fast-twitch muscle fibers, which means every motion they make will burn absurd amounts of energy. The large bat needs to drink equally absurd amounts of blood to sustain themselves. An active individual cannot go longer than 2 days without drinking 3/4 of its body weight in blood. They most often prey upon dinosaurs either their size or smaller, like Jeholosaurus, Psittacosaurus, or even young tyrannosaurs. But they are capable of forming gangs to take down larger dinosaurs like Jinshusaurus or Bolong. These gangs will work together temporarily, but once the animal is dead, in their greed they will fight over the corpse, the largest and most powerful among them getting his fill first. Outside of these gangs, they do not tolerate the presence of other members of their species. They are very territorial, and some may even seek out other members of their species in order to expand their territory. This brutal and greedy nature can be seen in their mating rituals as well. Males and females will scratch, bite, and kick each other while mating, because male Yamonstrogoi cannot inseminate a female without large amounts of adrenaline pumping through their veins. Females may only breed once or twice in their long lifespans due to the trauma of this experience, as well as the extensive amount of energy required to rear their young, which survive on their milk for almost 5 years before being kicked out of the roost, still not fully grown. These young, newly weaned Yamonstrogoi, just over a foot tall, will stick together for a few years for safety, usually until they're about 10 years old. They will also become incredibly aggressive towards one another very quickly, and those in the litter that don't mature as soon as their siblings may be cannibalized. For these reasons, the Yamonstragoi's numbers in the Jehol remain quite low, which is probably a good thing considering how much they have to eat to survive. Their incredibly well-adapted night vision comes at a cost. Yamonstrogoi are almost entirely blinded by daylight, being unable to see anything more than 3 feet in front of them. If they find themselves out past sunrise, they will cover their eyes with their large ears and have to rely on their smell to get back home. They roost alone, incredibly deep into underground cave systems, where they construct tight, body-sized dens made of dead wood and leaves using tree resin, something they learned observing the Pentames. Despite having to consume so much food so frequently, they can and often will enter a state of deep hibernation in their dens, where their metabolisms will slow to such a degree that they can survive without food for what may be decades, or perhaps even longer. Thank you guys once again for tuning in. I had a lot of fun making this one, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And just real quick, I'd like to apologize. This video was meant to be uploaded on Halloween as a sort of Halloween special, but as I got closer and closer to the deadline and the more I worked on the video, the bigger and better I wanted the video to be, and both Hurricane Helene and Milton taking my power out kind of put a damper on things for October, so my bad. As always, shout out to our patrons, some of which include Fluffy Dino, Lex Gunn, Galactic Narwhal, The Juan Kaiser, Mr. Matt, Scadu Master, Noctimebruch, Alec Foisey, MTL, and Rhubarb 600. If you want to be up on this board, go ahead and check out the Patreon, link in the description below.